After the Civil War, African Americans were free. They could go to new places and do new things, but they still had problems. Many did not have an education. They could not get good jobs. There was discrimination. The word discrimination there in red means prejudice or racism. Now, discrimination could be because of race, because of the color of someone's skin, but it could also be because of religion, because of being a woman. So there are different kinds of discrimination. But in this case, it was racism. For a long time, African Americans lived in separate neighborhoods from white people and went to separate schools. All right, so here's the word separate. That means apart or different. So African Americans went to different schools and lived in different neighborhoods from white people. This was called segregation. Segregation is or was a way in America to keep Black people and white people separate. So I'm going to show you an example. This is an example of segregation in American history. So if you can see, this is a drinking fountain for white people. This is a drinking fountain for Black people. So this big drinking fountain here for white people, the small one for Black people. And that is how it was in many different ways. So good neighborhoods, white people. Bad neighborhoods, Black people. Good schools, white people. Bad schools, Black people. Good jobs, white people. Bad jobs, Black people. So that was called segregation. 100 years later, in the 1960s, people started to change things. African Americans wanted the same rights as other Americans. And the word rights means things that you can do, like work where you want to work, live where you want to live, go to school where you want to go to school. So those are called rights. Voting is a right, okay? They wanted good schools, good jobs, and good houses. People protested. And remember, we talked about protested with George Floyd, where people come out and say what they want or what they don't want when they come out of their houses. Remember, the Boston Tea Party was a protest when they threw the tea into the ocean. So here, protest. This is some people, 50, a little bit more than 50 years ago, walking together in protest of some of those laws that made things separate and bad for Black people in the United States. And right after this picture was taken, these people were attacked by police and others, and they were hurt. They were beaten and they were taken to jail. So this is right before these people got hurt. So then it says they marched together, and you could see that those people were walking, right? They were walking across the bridge. So marched means walked. They sat in segregated places like buses and restaurants. So segregated is the adjective of segregation. So if places are separate, schools, restaurants, drinking fountains, we say they are segregated. An African American woman sat in a bus seat for whites only. She became famous. All right, so here's a picture of the African American woman sitting on a bus. Again, this was close to 60 years ago. And she said, nope, I'm not going to sit where the Black people are supposed to sit. I'm going to sit in the seat for white people. And so that is what she did, and she became famous. These protests, remember the walking and the sitting, were called the Civil Rights Movement. Civil rights, rights, remember those are things that you can do. Civil means the government lets you do it, right? So civil rights means what the government will let you do. And movement means, in this case, it means it happens in many places. So, for example, with George Floyd being murdered, that brought many people out to protest in Minneapolis, but it didn't stop in Minneapolis. It went all over the country and all over the world. So, movement means that it happens in many places. Martin Luther King Jr. was the leader of the civil rights movement. In 1963, many people came to Washington, D.C. They wanted new laws about schools and houses and jobs. They wanted to vote in elections. Martin Luther King Jr. gave an important speech. He talked about his dream that everyone in America could have a good life. And here is a picture of that important speech. That is Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963. And you can see all of the people everywhere in this part of Washington, D.C., coming to listen to him talk. A speech is a talk. So he was a very famous person in 1963, talking about making life better for African Americans or Black people in the United States. All right. King was assassinated or murdered in 1968. So assassinated means the same as murdered or killed. We use assassinated for famous people. Okay. So if someone is famous, then we would say they are assassinated if they are murdered. So King was assassinated in 1968. He was shot at his hotel in Tennessee. He is buried in Atlanta, Georgia. A monument in Washington, D.C. helps people remember him. After his death, many people continued to work together to make life better for African Americans. Now people are still protesting. All right, so I wanted to talk a minute about this word monument. Monument is a place to remember someone or something that happened in history. So I didn't put the link here, but I'm going to pull it up really fast. So I can show you a picture of what it looks like. So Martin Luther King Jr. has a monument in Washington, D.C. that looks like this. It's a big, 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 here's the people down here, right? See how little they are? Here's a big, 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 what we call statue, which is stone. When someone is, like their picture is made in stone, that's called a statue. And that's Martin Luther King Jr. And this is the monument or the place to remember Martin Luther King Jr. So back here, it says a monument in Washington, D.C. helps people remember him. So you can go to that place and remember Martin Luther King Jr. We also have a holiday in January where we don't have school. That also helps us remember Martin Luther King Jr. All right, so I hope that helps you with some of the vocabulary, and have a great day.